I'm back. So, get back to what we're doing here. So, I think you can see my point. And by the way, what I'm writing now may not be perfectly stated. It may not sound like I eventually want it to sound, but again, this is a draft. And as such, it's not going to be perfect. I've never known anyone who could write something the first time and have it come out perfectly. It doesn't work that way. I've even gone back and looked at stuff I've written years ago, or I wrote years ago, and I went over it a dozen times before I published it. And I will go back and look at it now and see where I could have made changes and made it better. Part of my career, a large part of my career, was writing for magazines. And I was always on a deadline. Some people get nervous with deadlines, some people don't like deadlines. I always liked having a deadline for one reason and one reason only. It told me I had to stop because writers will always feel that they can make their writing better. I mean, War and Peace by Tolstoy is considered a classic book. Tweak that a little, would have sounded a lot better. Writers are never satisfied. I will write things on Facebook and days later go back and fix them to sound better. That's just the mind of a writer. We always think we can be better. So, um, this is a draft. Now, in my head, I have given myself a deadline, and I will adhere to that deadline, even though there's no penalty, even though nobody but me cares. Um, that is the way I will finally say, I'm done. It goes in as it is. Now, I will say that when I was writing for magazines, there was another factor. I had an editor, and the editor would go over everything I wrote and might correct things. And I use the word might correct things so that it sounded better than what I wrote originally. And I say might for a very important reason. I had an editor one day, um, and I was writing a profile of a celebrity. That's what I did. I wrote celebrity profiles, in-depth celebrity profiles, and they were 3,000 or 4,000 words. Um, and I handed it in, and the editor told me that she liked it, but she wanted me to change something because she didn't think it made any sense. Well, if you read the article, it made perfect sense because it was a transition from what was to the reason behind it, if that makes any sense. And to get to that reason behind it, that was my transition, and it was a very smooth transition. But she couldn't see it that way. So I took it back and I rewrote it. And I gave it to her, and she still couldn't see it that way. And so I took it back and I wrote it differently and handed it to her. And she still couldn't see it. She still didn't like it. And I finally said, it's the only time in my career I ever said this. You know what? I probably don't understand what it is you're looking for. Why don't you correct it? And that way, we'll be able to get this finished and in the magazine. And she agreed. So she corrected it. She wrote, and it was only like one sentence, literally one sentence. And she rewrote that sentence and published it. And when the magazine came out, I read it, and that one sentence to me, and I'm sure it came across that way to a bunch of people, was like hitting a brick wall because there was no longer a smooth transition. It was like point A ended, point B began. And again, this wasn't a formal article, it wasn't a report, it was an in-depth profile of somebody, and it was a story basically, because that's what I write. I write stories. So in the middle of this story, she inserted a brick wall. Now it bothered me because I was the writer. It may not bother somebody else as much, probably wouldn't, the average reader, but I could see it. And I'm sure other people saw it. But that's what I had. I had an editor, and for better or worse, that editor was going to be with me every time I wrote an article. Fortunately, I wrote for different magazines, had different editors, and they weren't, and none of them were like she was. Now, you know, I'm not going to say she was right or wrong. In my mind, she was wrong. Um, but she's human. She was human and probably still is human. Hopefully. Uh, and she saw things in a very strict way. And I was just glad that's the only thing she didn't like, because if she had done that, she didn't touch another word in my article. But if she had done that to several different points in the article, it would have looked like a disaster. And it would have read like a disaster. And in the mind's ear, it would have sounded like a disaster. So, um, I had to deal with it. I had to deal with editors. Now, these days, I don't have an editor. And because I write books mostly, or write things that I want to write, um, I've come to a very important conclusion. And a lot of young writers always ask this question because they always want to please everybody. And the question is, how do I please everybody? How do I make sure that everybody likes my writing? And the answer is, you can't. Everybody is not going to like what you write. That's just a fact of life. Some people are going to love what you write. Some people are going to hate what you write. But for every person who loves what you write, there's going to be someone who hates what you like, and then another person who loves what you write. So you can't write for everybody. If you don't have an editor, if you have an editor, you're writing for that person because that person knows what they want. Right or wrong, they believe they know what will sell. Some editors are good, some editors are bad. But that doesn't matter. If an editor is hiring you to do something, then you're writing for that editor and no one else. Um, but if you're writing if you don't have an editor, you're writing for yourself. And you write the best story you feel you can possibly write in the way you want to write it. And not everyone's going to like it. I can guarantee that. Um, but for everyone who doesn't like it, there'll be one person or probably more who do like it. I got a review from somebody who read my book, The Year of My Life VR.com, the science fiction book. And the complaint he said was, this book isn't about VR, virtual reality. And he went on to explain why it was so terrible because it wasn't about VR and why he hated it. And to be honest, that review couldn't have been a better review for me because he was right. The book wasn't about VR, the book was about so much more. And so somebody might look at that and say, you got a really bad review from this guy. And my answer is, no, he gave me a great review because he actually backed up what the book was about. And he didn't realize it, he didn't see it that way because he had straight tunnel vision. He was just looking for a book about virtual reality. Well, that's not what my book's about. It's not a book about virtual reality, but all he saw was VR in the title, and that's all he cared about. So he actually wrote me a great review, although he didn't think he did. He thought he was tearing it apart. But all the reasons he used for tearing it apart were exactly the reasons that were in the book. So it was a great review. Um, if I were looking at it in another sense, I would call it a backhanded compliment. You know, when somebody says something like, hey, you're really good looking for a short person, that's a backhanded compliment. They're really saying you're a short person, that's what they say, but they're making it seem like it isn't. Anyway, so um, those same rules of not everyone's going to like what you write also apply to life. When you meet somebody, not everyone's going to like you. You're not going to make a great first impression on everyone, even if you're trying your very best. Sometimes you just won't. And you can't let it eat at you. And you can't let it get you down. It's just going to happen. You can't be liked by everybody. It's impossible. There isn't a person who's ever walked on this planet who has been liked by everyone. Okay, aside from me, there isn't a person on this planet who has been liked by everyone. I'm just kidding. So, um, getting back to it, I'm going to put my glasses on because these are supposed to be good for looking at a computer screen. Supposedly, they get rid of the harmful harmful, I don't know if I could talk, the harmful aspects of looking at computer screens all day, so I'm going to wear them. Um, anyway, so where are we? So take someone speaking with a very strong Southern drawl. That person could have a PhD in nuclear physics, but because of our conditioning from external sources, we immediately consider that person to be of a lesser intelligence. It's not true, but that's the way things are. So, what else? What can we do about this? How do we get around preconceived ideas? Well, I'll use myself as an example. I'm going to type that in there. Let's see here. If I can get my cursor back. It's here somewhere. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to use myself. I'm going to use myself as an example. Here we go. I'm going to eat. I'm going to eat. I'm going to use myself as an example. Period. I walk with crutches. Period. As I said, comma. Uh, Whoops, sorry about that. Sometimes I forget that the microphone is there. I know that people have preconceived ideas of someone who's handicapped, about handicapped people. Period. My objective when I first meet someone, comma, is to destroy those ideas before I even open my mouth. Period. If I'm walking up to them, comma, might immediately take one crutch in my other hand and put out my hand for a handshake. Period. That will show that person that the crutches are just a walking aid, comma, nothing more. Period. By doing this, comma, I'm not making the other person feel uncomfortable. Period. I've also pretty much blown up their preconceived notions of what it's like to be handicapped. Of what it's like to be handicapped. Period. New paragraph. So, comma, what do you do if your fear of meeting new people isn't due to outward appearance? Question mark. My suggestion would be to act as if it is. Period. Take a moment to understand why you feel insecure meeting new people. Period. Be open and honest with yourself. Period. Once you figure out the triggers that make you feel insecure when meeting new people, comma, you can also figure out a preemptive strike. that will obliterate that insecurity. Obliterate that insecurity. Period. Trust me, Kama, this does work. Period. Instead of fixating on the problem, Kama, you're working on a fix. For that problem. Period. Actually, fixing that. Try it the next time you meet someone new. One of the hardest things, most emotionally draining experiences in everyday life is going on a first date. Period. In most cases, comma, the only thing you know about the other person is what they look like. Period. That's it. Period. But what happens? The truth is, when you meet someone new, you're always going to be on your best behavior when you're first attracted to somebody. Period. Strike that. Period. Actually, unstrike that. Stop. Actually, you're on better than your best behavior. Period. You're on a behavior you've never seen before. Period. Truthfully, neither will the other person when they get to know you, because it's a very unrealistic behavior. Period. Exhibiting. Okay, I'm going to stop right now because actually I have to take a break and I want to keep this at 30 minutes. So I'm stopping right now. But I will be back later. Um, Follow me and you'll be able to watch me erase all of this. So for now, be good to yourself, to everyone else, and take care.